Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Data is a Ticking Time Bomb, How to Successfully Diffuse It by Leveraging Smart Technology. My name is Teresa Resick, and I'm AIIM's Director of Webinars, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And joining us today are David Jones of Nexio and financial services consultant Norman Wren. Nexio is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them very much for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. Just as we get started, I just want to share a few tips for participating in today's webinar. By joining the event live, you can resize the windows that you have in front of you. You're welcome to open the group chat. That's not open for you automatically, and that's where you can message with each other, but also with us here at AIIM. You can download the resources. There's a number of really great, cool links that we put in there for you, and you can do that at any time. But please also ask questions of our speakers throughout our webinar today. Do that in the Q&A feature, and we will hold these until the end, where we should have about 5 to 10 minutes to take questions at the end. Later, please take a survey, and I truly value your feedback, and it is in that list of widgets below, and I would appreciate if you would take the time to do that for us. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce the speakers we have with us. David Jones is the Vice President of Product Marketing for Content Services at Nexio, and he is responsible for developing the global go-to-market strategy and execution plan for Nexio's modern enterprise content services platform. Dave has over 20 years' experience in the emerging technologies space across multiple industries, including big data, analytics, cloud, and enterprise content management. Prior to joining Nexio, Dave was Vice President of European Operations with AIIM, and he was the CEO and founder of a document management startup for 8 years, and has held product and marketing management roles with Konica Minolta and Highland. David is a certified information professional and also holds a place on AIIM's board of directors. And Norman Wren is a senior financial services executive with over 20 years' experience operating at board level in complex and challenging regulated organizations. He has a wealth of experience in leading transformational change. Most recently, he was Director of Technology and Operations, responsible for the delivery of a digital transformation program for a major UK retail bank. Norman has worked for a number of financial services companies in Europe, including Santander, AXA, and Barclays, as well as working as a consultant in financial services with Andersen Consulting. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Dave Jones to begin our talk today. Dave?
Teresa, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. As Teresa said, my name's Dave Jones, and I'm excited to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about digital transformation within financial services, and actually within any organization and any type of organization. And I'm delighted to say that most of the session will be spent exploring the challenges faced in the real world. So exploring how an organization with real legacy data challenges can and did create a digital transformation strategy. So in terms of format, to start with, I'll take a very brief look at where we are with digital transformation. It's a term that's been around for a while now, so I think it's a sensible time to look at how well we're actually doing. How well are we transforming? And we'll find out in a few minutes. Then we'll get into the main meat of the webinar, where Norman will talk about a fascinating use case where a leading financial services organization had to deal with their own specific business challenges in order to deliver that digital transformation that they sought. I'll let Norman explain in his own words how that went, but just from the title of the ticking time bomb of data, you can get an idea of how big a challenge that was for them. And then finally, we'll pass the baton back to Teresa, who will guide us through a question and answer session. So that's the plan. Let's get going. So as I said earlier, digital transformation is a term that we've all heard, several times now. But how many organizations are actually doing digital transformation? And how well is it going? Well, let's take a closer look at that. So the first thing to note is that certainly within financial services, a lot of money is being spent on digital transformation. In 2018, the average spend per firm was $42 million. And that's expected to rise to $45 million in 2019. So we've got a lot of activity. We've got a lot of spend within this space. And I guess not surprisingly in some ways, 2/3 of that activity is being focused on customer-facing innovations. So the consumerization of technology and the fact that we've all now got and expect to have easy-to-use, effective apps on our mobile and tablet devices, that's one of the things that's driving the change, and driving the change specifically in financial services. The new raft of financial tech startups or fintech startups is heightening the need to respond to this as well. And quite frankly, the fear that big tech companies such as Google or Amazon can enter the financial services space, or any space they like really, that is making this subject and topic of digital transformation one of the top C-level priorities within all organizations today. So what we're seeing there is that we're spending a lot of money on a very well-defined need. And normally that sounds like a recipe for success. But in this case, it's doing quite the opposite. We're seeing that 88% of digital transformation projects are reported to be delayed, forced into a reduced scope, or canceled completely. Now that's not good. But in fact, it gets worse. It's that bad that 1 in 4 think that digital transformation is actually an insurmountable task, which is a huge challenge if you think about it. So what's gone wrong? Well, without wanting to sound overly simplistic, this type of problem has actually been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Let me explain more. Take a look at the quote on screen at the moment. Many of you will know the quote. It's from the Bible, and it's where Matthew was talking about a man who built his house on sand. And basically the story goes that as soon as the rain came and the winds blew and beat on the house fell down. And for me, this is exactly what's happening with digital transformation. We've already heard that the focus for transformation for many is customer engagement, customer experience. That's all well and good. But in this case, it's very similar to the man building his house on sand. He's focused on the end product without paying due care and attention to what he was building on. And that's the key to why many digital transformation projects are failing, in my opinion. So consider what we're aiming for. We're aiming for better customer experience, better engagement. We're aiming for optimized mobile and web applications. And ultimately, we're aiming for performance and scalability across all of these, because we can't deliver a slow or a sloppy service anymore. Customers just will not put up with that. But consider what we're building on. Consider the sand underneath our digital transformation house, if you will. All of us have got legacy systems. And by that, I mean old technology that manages some or all of our information systems. These systems are often difficult to use, probably not cloud-based. They're typically managed by dedicated staff, and they're almost always very expensive to maintain and run. Then you have the challenge that those legacy systems tend not to talk to each other. And they also don't tend to talk well to modern systems either, especially if you include cloud systems in that mix. And finally, we come down to one of the core challenges for me, the fact that we can't seem to find the information that we need to do our jobs. And we did some research last year with AIIM that highlighted actually that 75% of people can't find that information that they need to do their job in a timely manner. And if you can't find something, then you certainly can't use it. It's as simple as that. So let's be brutally honest here. Given all of these foundational challenges, is it any wonder that digital transformation is failing? Should we really expect anything different? Should we expect anything different to that house built on sand? Let's face it, we need to sort out the foundations before we start worrying about what the walls of our house look like or what type of kitchen we want to install in it. And I'm delighted to say that you're about to hear all about a real example of an organization that not only have realized and accepted these challenges, but actually sought to address them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Norman Wren to explain why he feels that data is a ticking time bomb. Norman, over to you.
Thank you, Dave, and a warm welcome to everyone who's attending. What I want to talk about today is data, which may come as a surprise when everyone is talking about the digital app revolution. So why raise the issue of data now? Well, I believe we've reached a tipping point. Digital technology is now mature, and as a result, we're seeing the pace of change accelerating and application and infrastructure lifespans reducing significantly. Even within the new applications and apps, the rate of change is accelerating, and these new technologies are driving an insatiable appetite to collect, store, and interrogate data. The underlying challenge this presents is that while the applications and the infrastructure are constantly changing, the underlying existing data remains unchanged. It is this potential disconnect that drives the time bomb analogy. The question is whether the vast data stores present a growing problem or an opportunity. I want to explore today what, if anything, can be done to manage the challenge. Why is this important? I think if we're all being honest, data has historically been treated as the poor relation in organizations. No one ever owned it. The digital age has fundamentally changed this, and I believe there are three critical drivers which impact the way we understand and use data. The first is customer experience and expectation. Financial systems traditionally have been developed for the institution, not for the customer. Access to data was tightly controlled, often limited to branch opening hours, and access was controlled via an employee. Data was collected and presented to fit internal needs and timescales, i.e. massive batch runs. Today, the reverse is true. Customers are in control. They decide when, where, and how they will access their data. They expect to be always on. They expect real-time performance and instant updates. And furthermore, they expect to get more than just the basic details. They want value added from the data we hold on them. The result of this is an explosion in demand for information from the customer, often in an unpredictable way. Customer behaviors are changing the way data is accessed. Secondly, regulators have changed the game. Customers have strong rights over their data. In Europe, things like PSD2 and open banking champion data portability and open up access to third parties and aggregators. GDPR has raised the bar and highlighted the difficulty in being able to find data and obscure it. And for many financial organizations, historical remediation has demonstrated the cost and difficulty of recreating data in a usable format, as it's often fragmented and difficult to use. So regulation has raised the bar for compliance and will drive a massive increase in demand for data from aggregators and new entrants. Thirdly, to exploit the data asset, new technologies such as big data, cloud computing, analytics, intelligent OCR, artificial intelligence, machine learning are all used to open up new opportunities. but fundamentally require access to massive amounts of data and significant computing power. They do so in a way which highlights shortfalls in legacy architectures and technologies as the applications and infrastructures struggle to meet demand, deliver in a timely manner, and provide an enterprise view of fragmented and unstructured data sets. To deliver on the regulatory, commercial, and customer demands, there are some significant challenges to be overcome. The first is access to data. Many systems constrain access as they're reliant on batch, data is stored in silos, and as a result it's fragmented. And much is not usable, as vast amounts of data is stored as unstructured images in PDF, scanned, stored, and forgotten. Second, data quality and data integrity issues become much more visible. Presentation of data is hampered by multiple formats and meanings. So, for example, in banking, a simple thing as a balance will have different rules and definitions across different systems. Furthermore, there's limited knowledge and documentation within the organization about the data. Data integrity is limited to a system and actually not across the enterprise. And finally, data has degraded in quality over time due to lack of control and proper management. Thirdly, with the opening up of access, data-related risks are becoming more prominent. And obsolescence often contributes to data access breaches and data leakage with severe consequences. As technology cycles increase, applications and infrastructure become obsolete quicker, and the cost of maintaining and updating and upgrading become more costly. This, combined with the regulatory agenda of compliance, data security, and protection, raises both the risk associated with the data and the cost of maintenance. Fourthly, the total cost of IT is rising, despite what everyone says about how cheap the digital world is. I think the truth here is that if we look at the cloud, we see unit cost decreasing, but actually the total cost of ownership is increasing substantially. On top of that, transforming platforms to be digital is expensive, and the new world sees rates of change increasing, with more systems becoming obsolete or needing upgrades more frequently. On top of this, business as usual running costs soar because access to legacy data is inefficient, and MIPS and storage is costly. Forecasting is difficult, resulting in expenditure on excess capacity. Modernizing architecture to be scalable, real-time, and always-on requires significant investment. But making the data usable requires further investment. Accessing legacy data via existing tools and architecture is inefficient. Performance suffers due to lack of scalability. The need to run batch cycles impinges on the need to be always on and always up to date. Ensuring integrity and security in the new world adds heavy overheads in a traditional environment. So the big question, what to do, and can we avoid being caught in a costly problem? Sadly, there is no easy answer. But to get value, I think there are three basic requirements. The first, understand the data. That means knowing where it is, what it means, and how it's used. This is a bit like archaeology. Extremely time-consuming, hard work, and if you're not careful, you might not find anything of value. The second is you need to manage the data. And to do so, you need to have a clear enterprise-wide architecture for data, a clear understanding of how it will be used, who can access it, and how it will be kept secure and up to date. You need to implement clear ownership and governance around data. In other words, treat it as an asset. And the third requirement is being able to exploit the data. And this is driven by understanding the business purpose and usage. Not all data is worth keeping or being available for everyone to access. You need to think of data as an ecosystem. You need to define it, be clear on how to access it, understand how it's used, and underpin it with an infrastructure that makes it scalable, performant, and up to date. It is also important to add value. And one of the things we'll talk about is building metadata to bridge the old and new worlds. And finally, you need to build data skills and capability. As an organization, be much more data-driven. So, if we wish to mitigate the risks that the digital world brings, there are some considerations that need to be addressed in detail. As I've said, you need to understand the data at a detailed level. This means being clear not only on what the data means technically, but also business-wise. How is it treated, created, and understand how it's used across the enterprise. If data is not to be a costly drag, you need to have this information. This used to be a hugely manual effort, but now there are an increasing range of tools to assist discovery, definition, and creation of metadata. I think secondly, you need to define the digital architecture and principles. And doing so, you need to take account of data as well as application and the infrastructure. Otherwise, the risk is you create silos in the digital world. There's a need to define an ecosystem which allows the ability to utilize new technologies and make coexistence simpler. Distributed data, cloud-native processing, and data management tools are critical. I think the idea that you would just dump all your data into a huge data lake was all the rage. But increasingly, the issues around integrity, understanding, scale, and complexity of managing both the data and different usage profiles has shown this to be impractical. You need to define clear rules around how data is used and be clear on the business value and purpose. This dictates how and where the data is stored and accessed. And in particular, this is very true for unstructured data around forms and PDF. In looking at the future, consideration should be given to create a common layer which allows separation of data from processes and makes use of metadata. This is critical to be able to access legacy data efficiently and reduce the risk from migration and rapidly changing technology cycles, allowing a staged migration approach. With the explosion of demand, both internally, consumer and regulator, infrastructure and architecture has to be scalable and on demand. Finally, there needs to be clear ownership. Data is an asset and needs to be managed. Therefore, clear ownership and accountability as well as sound governance need to be put in place. Developing on these points, there are some fundamentals that need to be in place. And what you will note is not many are technological. Data as an asset needs business ownership. For the data needs to be defined and accountability clear for maintenance, integrity, and accuracy of the data, and appropriate governance needs to be in place. Investment is needed to ensure that data is understood, something which requires significant effort. It is also needed to create and maintain the metadata in a cost-effective manner. 3, not all data needs the same attention, and therefore being clear what needs to be kept and is accessible, and clear use over usage are important. There's a need to upgrade skills around data. Investment in data architects and data engineers is a basic requirement. Data architecture and design principles need to be developed to support both digital and legacy world. The technology stack, infrastructure, and data architecture needs definition at the enterprise level. There's a need to upgrade skills to build digital-ready capability. We move from developers to engineers. We need cloud specialists. We need to transform how the infrastructure is built and maintained. And finally, we need a clear roadmap to set out how the data will be used, whether it will be left in situ, coexist, or migrated, and how and when this will happen. So what to do? Stick or twist? Doing nothing is not an option. This is because the status quo is not supportable, because of obsolescence, security risks, high cost of maintenance, and just the basic risks of running on outmoded technology. But most importantly, it restricts your ability to compete and add value. Most organizations have looked at a couple of other options. The first option is to replace everything with new technology, infrastructure, and applications. Dump all data in a data lake. And I think most organizations have found that to be too difficult, as Dave's highlighted. A big bang approach is the highest risk and has the highest failure rate. Introducing new applications is one thing in a greenfield site, but combining it with significant historical data and data migrations is another. Migrating data is a major program in its own right and carries high risks, as recent experience transformation in the UK has shown. These migrations also mean that other changes cannot occur, and as a result, they demand significant management attention and time, which in itself carries a cost. I think there is growing attention looking at the second option, looking at a form of coexistence as a stepping stone to minimize the risk of a big bang change. This requires investment in smart technology to create a common layer separating out process from data in order to be able to exploit data for value. It also allows a reduction in risk, enables value to be exploited from the data without undertaking massive change at the same time. So, to summarize, if you're to survive, meet consumer expectation, be compliant, and get value from your data asset, you will need to understand and document your data and make it available in simple, understandable way. Build mechanisms to maintain the data, definitions, and usage. Be clear what the architecture looks like at an enterprise level, covering data, infrastructure, and applications, and being clear how the new world will interface with the old. Build a common layer as a critical step on the route map to enable you to bridge the gap between legacy and the future digital world. Avoid big bang changes if at all possible, and avoid the pitfalls of trying to access legacy data through legacy systems. Be clear on the business purpose and value of your data. Have a roadmap. It's not going to be possible to eat the elephant at one sitting. You need to break it down into manageable pieces. You need to invest in the right skills and capability or partner with people that have that. There is a huge gap in terms of digital skills and traditional skills and a lack of understanding of how data can be used in the new world. Finally, be prepared to spend a lot of money. There is no escape from this. Thank you, and I will now hand over to Dave and Teresa for questions.
Norman, thank you very much. That's a really great practical example of some of the challenges that I'm sure many of our audience are facing today. And just before I hand back to Teresa for questions, a lot of what Norman's talked about is looking at the strategy. We've taken that and wrapped it up with the strategy, the roadmap definition, the tooling, and the delivery, and really that whole process of how to avoid the big bang migration and how to manage this properly, we call modernization. And one of the areas that we talk about on our website is how you modernize information systems. We talk a lot more about Norman's story, but also some of the technology aspects that go into modernization of information management. So I'd encourage you to go take a look at that. And thank you very much again for listening. There are some contact details on the screen, but I'd like to pass back over to Teresa for some Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much. And I heard, as David said, heard a fabulous use case example from Norman Wren, and very grateful that he's able to be here today, because hearing that firsthand perspective is always such a valuable exercise in learning. So thanks, Norman, for your time being here today. But we do have a whole bunch of questions that are coming in, and do please continue to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. But Norman, I want to direct this first question over to you. And you've talked a lot about the challenges caused by legacy data. But what about the newer cloud-based systems? Are they creating silos within businesses? And this person is saying that they are seeing that it's creating silos. Does your approach help with that?
I think the simple answer is yes, it does. The basic precept that we've got here is by building a federated architecture with a common layer, separating data from business process helps. And it is a huge risk. Just because you are digitizing your applications or you're buying software as a service doesn't mean that you won't run into problems with silos if you don't think about the enterprise-wide structure and separate that out. And I think that's what Dave has been talking about, modernization, is being able to be very clear where you're going, how the architecture fits together, and how you be able to access the asset of data that underpins it all.
Dave, this next question I'd like to direct to you, and Norman, feel free to join in with this. But someone has said that is asking about you talked a lot about customer experience, and Norman shared a lot about that in his presentation. What does that actually mean to you?
Well, I think Norman brought up some interesting points around customer experience, as did that data that we talked about early on. You know, customer experience is what everyone's focusing on, and I think that's valid and that's right. But what I think some people miss with regards to customer experience is that, again, they look at customer engagement, customer experience purely in terms of almost the digitization of existing processes. So think about when you open a new savings account, maybe with your bank. The old process was that you'd fill out a form, you'd provide some proof of ID, you'd go through a standardized process. And what many people are mistaking customer experience for is turning that process into a mobile app, for example, and allowing you to scan in your proof of ID and to fill out very quickly using your tablet or your mobile device, fill out those form fields and submit that into the process. And don't get me wrong, that's an improvement over the old process, but it's not really taking full advantage of the capabilities that you've got. For example, my bank already has proof of ID for me. Why do I need to scan it in again? Why can't we just connect the systems in the background and really streamline that customer experience to just say, look, here's what I've got about you, just check that it's correct and that it's still valid. And actually, all I need to know from you now is which type of savings account you want. And really, instead of, it's a term that John Mancini used several times, instead of repaving the K path, let's actually build a new path. Let's actually figure out how we can do this properly moving forward. So I think customer experience for me is about not just digitizing existing processes, but really looking at how we can re-engineer those processes to take full advantage of where we're at.
I think that's a good summary, Dave, that, there is a lot of temptation to get things done quickly, which is just to recreate the existing process and experience in a digital way. I mean, for me, it's about taking a holistic view underpinned by three things. One, the design has to be from the customer in, not the organization out. Secondly, we have huge amounts of data about the customer, so you use big data analytics to give you a better understanding about what the customer is doing and how they're interacting with you. And three, you build in a feedback loop in whatever you're building so that you're getting constant, important information from the customer about how they feel about the experience. Not about the process, but about the experience.
Norman, I want to direct the next question to you, and I'm just going to read it here because it's a bit of a lengthy question. Someone's asking, what about the cloud? My current systems don't let me go to the cloud, but they actually don't want to. But I would like to be in the position to move to the cloud when their team is ready. Does this approach help?
I mean, I think there's no easy answer to moving to the cloud, but in defining the roadmap early on and being clear where the value is and the steps you're going to take, and there are some things you can do. You can separate out whether you put an application in the cloud or whether you put the data in the cloud or you put both. And that's one of the reasons why you want to think about smart technologies in a common layer, because that allows you to have some flexibility in the decisions. And you can put apps in the cloud, but you can still access legacy data in your environment and vice versa. So it gives you flexibility, and it's really all about building that roadmap to match your capability and your long-term architecture.
I think just to jump in there as well, Teresa, if I may, I think some of the challenges that we're seeing organizations experience, and part of the reason for the modernization program, is that some of the legacy systems that people have simply can't be moved to the cloud. So they're almost feeling tied in that they have to replace those systems. Again, as your questioner said, not because they want to move to the cloud today, but because they want to be in a position to be able to move to the cloud with the infrastructure and the systems that they have when they're ready. And to Norman's point, what we're talking to people about is not the fact that a rip and replace of that existing system is necessarily the requirement to do that, but that a slightly more staggered approach where you access the content and the data from within those legacy systems from a different system that's cloud enabled means that there are different ways to get to the same end game.
Another question here, and do please send in your questions in, because happily we're getting a lot of them. Someone's asking here that, within your talk today, you've indicated, and Dave, I'd like to start with you, indicated, average spend, and also mentioned that a high percentage of projects are suffering or canceled. Do you think that this implies that organizations are not spending enough?
Quite the opposite, actually.
Dave, hello? Did I lose Dave's sound?
I think we've lost Dave's sound, but perhaps I can
okay,
step
go
in.
ahead.
I think it's a bit of a curate's egg. The question is, are we spending money in the right place and in the right way? And I think that a lot of the failures are that people are throwing money at a problem without really having thought through the solution. So it's difficult to say, do we need to spend more? But I would say that a lot more effort needs to be put in thinking about the value of your expenditure and being much more focused rather than having mega projects designed to take on too big a task too quickly. Everybody's impatient. This is very difficult to do.
Okay. And while we're waiting for Dave to get dialed back in, he just pinged that he's rejoining us in a second. Norman, let me direct this next question over to you. Someone's saying that technology keeps changing, and if we move to something new today, what's to stop this person and their company from needing to do the same thing in 5 years' time?
Well, I think the whole point of the new digital world and the new technologies is to actually increase the rate of change, and that is by design. And so therefore it comes back to the importance of thinking about your strategy and your architecture, because yes, if you get it wrong and you continue to just buy product systems or not have an enterprise view of your data, whether it's new technology or old, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of silos and having difficulty to move to the next generation. And that's why I think fundamentally, if you look at your architecture and you build this common layer and you're able to separate out the data from the application, then you have a better chance in the future to manage what will be a not so much a one-off, which we used to have, which is that when each new version of new technology came on, there was a huge effort to get to it, and to have a much more staggered and controlled move, and you will move in smaller chunks continuously if you follow that approach that we've outlined today.
And Dave, just checking to see if you're back on the phone line part of this.
I am indeed. Apologies for me dropping off. Technology died on me. But if I can just jump in and respond to the question that Norman just answered as well.
Yes, please.
I think the way in which software is architected today is very different to when a lot of our legacy systems were put in. So the way of doing things maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago was to build one piece of software, and that software was all controlled from one code base. It was installed in one instance, and if you needed to make changes to that, if you needed to upgrade that, the only solution was to change the whole thing. The way in which software is built nowadays is much more modular. So instead of being one big box, you have a number of little, smaller boxes that each do part of the puzzle and each talk to each other. So what that means is that you can replace part of that puzzle, upgrade part of that puzzle, introduce new features into there much, much easier than you could do in the past. So I think the key thing today is to understand that from a strategic point of view, and make sure that the systems that you've got in place, and systems plural, not just one system, but multiple systems, can create that ecosystem approach where it gives you much more flexibility and makes you much more future-proof in terms of your architecture to then deliver the features and ultimately the benefits that your business and your users need.
And Dave, I want to go back to let you have the opportunity to answer the question, and I doubt you heard Norman's answer to it when the person was asking if organizations are spending enough, and we lost your sound just as you were starting to answer that. So I just wanted to have the opportunity for you to share your thoughts on that question.
Sure. I was talking to myself. I had the most wonderful answer that I gave out and then realized that my phone had died. So hopefully I can reproduce it. I was basically saying, though, that I don't think that people are spending too much money, or that they're not spending enough money. I think they're just spending the money in the wrong places. And, to go back to the analogy of building a house on sand, the first thing you need to do when you build any house is sort out the foundations. And, the modernization approach that we're talking about, that Norman was advocating as well, requires that money needs to be spent up front on that infrastructure, on that architecture underneath. Once that's in place, then spending money at the levels that people are spending money now can be put to better use and can be turned into much faster and much more reproducible results, and multiple applications and multiple solutions can be built on top of that platform very quickly. So I don't think that they need to spend more money necessarily. I think they just need to put that platform, put that foundation in place first to allow them to get better value from that spend. A
very similar answer to what Norman had shared. So
good. I'm glad.
Two good perspectives. And I do want to take one more question in here. And someone is saying that they like the idea of modernization, and it makes sense, given how old some of their systems are and what it costs old systems cost companies every year. But just the thought of migrating from one system to another scares someone, and they said here it literally scares them to death. And I can relate. So, Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, completely agree. Big bang migrations, as Norman alluded to earlier, are scary things, and certainly there's an old joke within the IT arena that a CIO doing a migration, actually CIO potentially stood for career is over, because migrations were such scary things and were such risky things I think the nice thing about the modernization approach and that open approach and the modular approach, so all of these things coming together, is that there are now models, there are now approaches where you don't have to do rip and replace. You can connect into legacy systems to almost build a bridge between them and the applications and at the front end. And as Norman said, separate the data from the user interface and the business logic. What that allows you to do is to then migrate content and data in the background from one system to another without the user, without the application ever needing to know anything about it. What that means is that instead of potentially having to do a migration over the weekend and have it all moved by Monday morning so that you could flip the switch on the new system, you can migrate over a period of days, weeks, months, check every single item that's migrated, and it turns migrations into a much more controlled, much more robust, and much more risk-averse process, rather than that, sort of let's throw all my chips in and hope to do this migration in one big bang approach. So migration is getting a lot less scary, I think, is what I'm trying to say with all of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Just wanted to remind everyone that our AIM 19 conference is coming up next week in San Diego at the Manchester Grand Hyatt. And I know I'm going to be there. Dave Jones was telling me he's going to be there, and so are hundreds of other people going to be there. If you like today's webinar, our conference is going to have many great sessions on similar topics. And on the screen, I've just listed here a very few of the topics that will be discussed and represented in a variety of different formats, with the roundtable discussions, the different presentations, and there's a couple of really awesome keynotes that are going to be there as well. So to learn more about AIM 19 and to register, I'm told that we have a few slots left open. So just go to aimconference.com, and we really do hope to see you there next week. And since we're getting to the end of our time today, I just want to remind everyone that we have recorded the webinar, and so you can come back and listen to it again or invite your colleagues to listen to it, and we will be emailing everyone the link to access the replay. Don't forget to download the resources. There's some really cool stuff there. Do take the feedback survey. I would greatly appreciate that. And I very much want to thank our underwriter, Nuxio. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM would not be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you, Nuxio, for your sponsorship and support. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I do just want to leave everyone with our speaker's closing thoughts today. So I'm going to start first with Norman Wren and your closing thoughts.
I think this is a challenge to move the digital world. So I have three things. Make sure you have a clear roadmap, start with the foundation, and build a common layer.
Thank you, Norman. And Dave Jones from Nuxio, your closing thoughts today.
I think really just to build on what Norman said, have that roadmap. Don't try and eat the elephant all in one go. Set yourself some very clear, achievable goals, and really understand the way in which the underpinning technology has changed to help you achieve those goals now. The days where you had to change your business and the way that you work within your business to fit around a piece of software, those days have gone. We're now in the environment where software solutions fit around your business to allow you to get faster return on investment and ultimately deliver what you want to deliver much, much quicker.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you at AIM 19 and then at our next webinar. Have a good afternoon.